My name is Elyse Dodgson. I'm the International Director at the Royal Court. I'd like to introduce you to Dalia Taha, who just wrote the play you see, Richard Twyman, who just directed. I started to work in Palestine. Well, I first went to Palestine 20 years ago, exactly 20 years ago, in 1995, on a research visit. And it's been a great love affair, really, to be traveling throughout those years on various projects with playwrights. I think I know the first workshop that we started was in 1998, and we worked with a group of playwrights from all over the West Bank, and we lived together at a place called the Paradise Hotel in Bethlehem. It always had this kind of ironic feel that it was called the Paradise Hotel on Manger Street in Bethlehem. And it was a very, very complicated and time, as it always is in Palestine, and there were lots of things going on outside of the hotel, with young people in the streets revolting, throwing stones, and a lot of confrontations with the army. And sometimes the workshops were disrupted, and we would say to the writers, we'd go and we'd look at some of the action that was happening out in the streets, and this was in 1998. And they'd say, come back, we can see this happening anytime, but we can't do a playwriting workshop anytime. And over those years, we've had the most extraordinary experiences, and many, many Royal Court playwrights and directors have gone to Palestine and worked with writers. April de Angelis, who's sitting here, I'm sorry to embarrass you, was one of the first writers to go. And here we are, 17 years later, after that first workshop. And we've done many, many things related to Palestine over those years. Workshops and readings and plays about Palestine. But this is the first time we've had a young Palestinian writer that we fully produced after all those years, and we feel very proud of that. So I'd like to start off by asking Dalia, how did this all start? Because you're only 28 now, and you started to work on this play 2 years ago, when you only just really decided that you wanted to write plays. So just a bit about the idea in the beginning.
Yeah, so the idea of the play, it started with, I wanted in the beginning to write, like at some point in my life, I wanted to write about the invasion of Ramallah, because, and that specific experience, because like we feel as people that experience in particular left its marks on the Palestinian society, and especially because like the people, like the kids and teenagers and people who went through in the early 2000s, it grew up during the 90s, which was a relatively peaceful period of time. So the intensity of violence experience was totally different, and even like the mechanisms of controlling the Palestinian society prior to the second Intifada and after the second Intifada differed. And yeah, and I always, and so I wanted to explore, investigate that like what happened there, like what did the violence experience to people, and how it changed the society in some ways. And then and then as we moved forward with the play, we kept going back and forth between, because at some point it was like set in Ramallah, the play, but then I was maybe we should set it and specify the place. And at some point in the summer, with the war in Gaza, when it was happening.
That's when you came back, because you first came and worked with us in 2013, and the play was very much about Ramallah.
Yeah.
And then you
But
came
even
back.
but Ramallah wasn't mentioned a lot.
No, it wasn't
Well,
mentioned.
so yeah, then I came back again in last summer.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that was exactly in the middle of.
Yeah, it was in the middle of the war in Gaza, and then it was something about. So even like when you want to write a play, even when it's about the past, like if you want to write a play, I feel it's important to engage or respond to something that's happening in some ways. I mean, like to establish that link between the past and the present. So it invites us to think about what happened in some way.
Richard.
Yeah.
Yes.
No, I was just saying because we were. It was in July of last year, and Dalia had been planning to come months and months in advance to do the next workshop on this play that we were so excited by, and we wanted to work it with actors and see if we could take it forward, because at that stage the challenge of writing a play about incarceration was so hard, because how do you write sort of actively dramatic characters when they have no control over their everyday circumstances and they have no agency in their life because they're totally powerless. So writing powerless characters was incredibly difficult, and we knew there was something incredibly exciting in the world that Dalia was tapping into, but we were trying to work out how we could realise it dramatically. And then because of the coincidence of timing of Dalia coming in July and then what happened in Gaza over the summer, we were in the workshop as bombs were falling, literally, doing this play. And it was impossible to ignore. It had this very strange experience, actually, of the play that we were working on at that stage almost felt tamer and gentler than what was happening in reality. And so we spoke afterwards after the workshop, and Dalia, I think, tapped into a lot of real-life stories of people that she knew who were living through that at that time, and into her own anger, and began to articulate that. And the play sort of, for me, went from feeling like it was slightly through a window pane, we were looking at these events, suddenly the window pane got smashed, and it got sort of thrust into the present. It's very painfully, but in a way that felt like it really started to work dramatically.
Yes, we did a reading of the older version of the play, and then just about a day or two before you left, you came up with a proposal of how you would change the play, and we were all sorts, Vicky Featherston, our artistic director, and Richard and I, it was...
Yeah, I think also the kids were not that prominent in the previous draft.
That's right, yeah.
But there were more kids, but I feel in this draft. So, yeah, I feel like with the last draft, what we arrived to is, the idea is also how to tell the story. Like what also was striking about what was happening in Gaza and the stories we kept hearing from people living there is what would you do in a situation, and what would you do to protect your children and to shield them from what's happening outside, and the strange tactics and like the absurdity of the tactics you'd use in order to invent a word that counters in some way the horror of the outside world and the impossibility of that at the same time, and so it's and so then we realize it's a good angle to talk about this, like the relationship between children and parents, because like in this relationship there is something about power dynamics, and then it's also it's a relationship full of tension because it's about power, but at the same time it's full of tenderness and the desire to protect, and also it makes you feel limited and trapped because maybe you want to do something but you have kids and families, so yeah.
And Richard, you came up with this idea of how you were going to set it. I think the original idea that you worked on with Lizzie Clacken was a much more open setting.
Yeah,
just
the
if you could
design
talk a bit.
process went through lots of sort of evolutions, really. And then we decided, it's so funny with designing, I remember the first meeting I had with Lizzie Clacken, who's a sort of extraordinary, amazing designer of the show. I said, I really don't want to do it end on, because I really want the audience to feel that they're totally immersed in this world. So whatever we do, I really don't want it to do end on, which is what we ended up doing. And we went through so many different phases and different model boxes. And in the end, I sort of realised, actually came from one photo in the end. We did so much research and put together a huge Dropbox file and covered walls and photos and tried to just really immerse ourselves visually in the world. And there was one extraordinary photo, actually the blue from these walls comes from that exact photo, of a family sat on some chairs and an old man had come out of the doorway and was eating something that was dribbling from his mouth and everyone was laughing behind him. And there was this extraordinary thing of they were all looking at you, and there's a sense you couldn't look away from them. And equally, there was something about the humour and the life of that photo that we felt was so important to capturing the essence of this play and of people in Palestine. So, yeah, and then the end on, when we did get there, we sort of went, no, that's exactly it, because I want every person in the audience to have the same perspective on the action. I don't want anyone to be able to sort of feel like they've missed anything or that they can look away at any point. And I want those moments where people turn out at you and stare at you, the London audience, and sort of say, this is happening, or this has been happening very recently. So it felt very, very important, that quality. And then the other thing that just became essential was incarceration. Just the need to put pressure on these characters that they couldn't escape, that there's no way out, seemingly. And a sort of strange space that was mixed, I mean, everything in it is inspired by stuff that's in reality. Generators that are sort of hooked up and taking electricity from other flats and all of that, but it's also sort of put to a point, hopefully, of absurdity, a staircase that goes down to nowhere. And yeah, and then the other thing for me that felt so important is we were so inspired by the images that Dalia writes. She gives you these, it's like a tip of the iceberg play, I've always described it. It's this very clear tip of the iceberg, but it reveals so much more that's happening underneath in the outside world, in these characters. And the few images that are in each scene feel so clear, and we wanted to sort of to honour that and celebrate it. And I feel, we were talking to Lizzie a lot, we struggled so hard to avoid the cliches that get built up, I think. The sort of calcification of imagery from Palestine in particular, but also that part of the world, that I think distances people. And a sort of deadness that happens after hours and hours of news footage. And we wanted to find a way of breaking through that, and the power of imagery and the power of imagery that was totally incongruous with an expectation of what Palestine is felt very important. So that's why we start the show in the way we do. It's why there's so much colour, hopefully. And always a sort of ambiguity in those images, you know, quite literally the colour of the fireworks, but of course they're not fireworks, and we know that. So, yeah.
And also one last question to you, Dalia, and open it up, and that's the rehearsal process. You've never really been through a whole rehearsal process like this before, because Dalia's been with us for many weeks now. What was it like, and what did you get out of that?
Yeah, I really love the rehearsal process. It's fun to be there, especially and to engage with the work. It's always a fun experience because it's like you write something and then the director and actors take it and turn it into something else, and it's both frustrating and fun at the same time. So, but like that shift, the way it keeps shifting and moving and changing, and the way you make discoveries together about, and it's also very helpful for the writing itself, because when you hear things, you know, like it's easier for you to know what works and what doesn't work. And we made some changes, like we even swapped some scenes.
Very late.
About 2 days ago, yeah.
Just 2 nights before the opening. But yeah, the main thing about being in the rehearsal room is think it's like something I was telling people when I went back to the States for a week, is that like it really reminds you of something very important. It's that the essence of every human experience is people trying to reach out, and the failure and the impossibility and the loneliness, and theatre gives a presence to this impossibility, that like whatever is the political context, but it's about people trying to come together and form a kind of a collective. And I don't know why I feel it strongly whenever I'm in rehearsals, or I'm just reminded.
You even said that you think you want to become a director now.
No, please. No,
that's what I thought. I'm going to open it up to see if you've got a few questions that you'd like to ask Richard or Dalia. If anyone has a question. Yeah? Yeah?
Do you do theatre in Palestine as well? Are you able to?
Yeah, the first play I worked on, we toured it in seven Palestinian cities. But also I started writing for theatre very like 4 years ago. So yeah, I don't have real experience working with theatres there, but I have relatively, yeah.
Yes, Rebecca?
Yeah, thank you for the performance and the writing. But I wanted, I'm not suggesting with this question that you haven't done this, but I wondered if you could reflect a little bit on, or say something more about the possibility of translating a Gaza experience.
Yeah, personally, I don't think it's possible at all to translate any experience, and especially an experience like the Gazan experience of war, because the absurdity and the horror and the violence is unimaginable. It is like the essence of any traumatic experience is that is how it's not possible to construct a concrete version of what happened, and always always the fragmentation or the disintegration of language, of narration, is what transfers or communicates something about the horror of that experience. Because like if you see if you listen to the testimonies of the abused, or people who went through traumatizing experiences, their narrative is always impossible or not fully there, and that failure or that impossibility to articulate what really happened is communicates something. And I think like even in this play, I didn't say that it is the Gazan experience or even the Palestinian experience, or because I don't think any writer can do that. What you do as a writer is to try to explore one version of any human experience, and there are some references in the play that if you know what's happening in Palestine or what happened in Gaza, that you yourself start to make maybe the connections, and that's yeah.
That's very good. Anybody else? Yes.
Hi, I just want to say thanks. Fantastic play. Really interested in the son, Khalil. Right? Yeah. The sort of character that he was playing. Were you trying to get across that beyond the sort of the war and the things we focus on in the media here, there are still multitudes of other issues and problems people deal with at home, or that his issues were caused by the environment that he'd grown up in, around conflict and etc.
It changed a bit,
Yeah.
in the course of writing the play.
Yeah. But I always felt that it's both at the same time, because like it in some way it's a result, but it's also, even if it's not the result of the horror of the outside world, it's having to deal with someone who's in this situation, and who is in this situation is also brings something about the intensity of the outside world. But yeah, mostly like, I think, yeah, with the game they engage with the kids, and it's the impact of the reality on kids is the main thing, I think.
But Khalil in the very first draft was much older.
Yeah, he was
So-
17.
Yes, made a lot of difference when you decided
Yeah,
to make him younger. I don't know.
Yeah.
and it's allowed. Yeah.
I think, yeah, that his obviously relationship at that age with Lubna was totally different and had a very different connotation to it, and he was very clearly, again, even in that draft, it was never defined why he was like he was, and I think by bringing him there's much more, by making him younger, there's much more ambiguity about exactly that question you're raising, and I think there is something about it being both. I mean, a child of his age, if it was specifically set in Gaza, a child of his age would have lived through this experience 4 times already now. So there is something about how that will affect him. And then there's also about how he grows up within the play. So, and how that his journeys to learning about what's happening outside and also happening with him take the form of a sort of strange warped hall of mirrors from what's actually then happening in the outside world, yeah.
Thank you.
Anything else?
Yes.
I'm not quite clear what language you use when you're in Palestine. Perhaps you can explain how you deal with the language issue when you're doing your workshops.
So Arabic. So we whenever we work abroad, we always
Oh, I
work
see.
with writers in their original language, and work with interpreters and with translators.
We never expect any of our writers to speak English or write in English. So Dalia does speak English, but she doesn't. But her mother tongue is Arabic. So we've worked with translation all the way through. Although there was one point when you actually wrote a draft very quickly in
Yeah, no,
English.
that was just furniture because he needed that.
Yeah. So but I think it's so important that writers are able to communicate and create their art in their mother tongue. I think it's really challenging to do it in a second language. And so
you might talk about, we heard a reading of this play when we were working in Beit Jala in the West Bank, in November in Arabic, which was pretty extraordinary for us to hear the play in Arabic by a local theatre company.
yeah, it was in November, and we knew we were producing it, and it felt like an incredible opportunity to hear the play in its original language, just to hear the rhythms, to see where the humour was, and to hear feedback from people that sort of know that material more than anyone. And it was one of the most extraordinary moments I've had in the rehearsal room, because we read it and we were incredibly nervous. Dalia was in America at the time, but one of her friends was in the room, and she was texting her saying, what did they think? And she was very, very worried about how it would be received by people, essentially it's about. And we spoke for almost an hour afterwards, and they said the most beautiful things, really, but most importantly, they picked up on the tiny details. They picked up on having a bag ready by the door, packed, because at any point you could go. There was one thing that will always stick in my head, and I think I brought it up maybe 3 or 4 times in rehearsals, Serena backed me up on this, which was one guy talking about the idea of what is safe and where is safe. And he was talking about how at one point he decided to put his family behind a couch for them all to sleep there overnight, because he felt that part of the room behind the couch was going to be safer if a bomb fell than the other part. And as he was telling the story, he just started laughing hysterically and went, well, of course, if a bomb fell, we'd all die anyway. And it was that level of sort of absurdity and being able to look at the situation, the humour, that felt so key in terms of tapping into something really essential about about it. So it was a really valuable experience as a director to get their reactions and hear it in its original language.
I'll take one more question.
When you were doing these workshops, were there any messages that the Palestinian people you were doing these workshops with that they didn't want to put across? Any messages
Sorry,
they
I'm
didn't
not
want to put
hearing very well.
Well, we were doing workshops in Palestine with any messages they didn't want to come across in the plays they were writing.
Correct.
Yes,
This play?
not the, in the place that the other writers were writing in Palestine.
Sorry, I may not have understood the format of the workshops, but as I understood it, you sat down with some victims of the crisis in Palestine.
No. So we're doing some things. We work. We've been running a long-term project with another group of writers in Palestine over the last year and a half. And they had 3 different workshops, and we were out there in November. And whilst we were there, we got a group of actors in to read the play for us and hear it. And it was their experiences of living through the invasions in Ramallah in the early 2000s that they were talking about. Yeah.
Yes, sorry, because we use workshops in such a broad way, but there have been many different ongoing workshops in Palestine, and the most recent ones at the same time as we were working on Dalia's play. Well, Dalia, thank you. You want to say anything?
Yeah, about also like the guest experience and translating, because also like in this play, I wasn't trying to tell the story of the Gazans or the Palestinians but to explore and investigate what happens to people when they are subjected to violence and how they interiorize that violence and and what happens to people in wars, like, because we usually tend to see that wars are not just limited to the scale of physical destruction, but the psychological impact and how it affects.
And actually, the thing, it almost relates to your question, but the other thing they said when those actors read it out, I remember so clearly, was they said what they found so beautiful about the play is that because of its universality and the way that this could be a conflict that's happening in Syria or another part of the world, they felt that it totally humanised them and took away the sort of overbearing geopolitical sort of context that often surrounds this type of work, and allowed them to be seen as the same people living through that experience anywhere in the world. And that for them they felt was the single most important thing that the play did.
But it's true, but it's also like speaks to the Palestinian experience, and it says something about like the real impact of violence is the systematic destruction of societies and how it perpetuates like brokenness, and how it prevents the possibility for a society to form an idea of itself, or to break through that cycle of violence that becomes interiorized. So yeah.
Dalia, tomorrow you're leaving us, and I can't tell you how bad we all feel about that. But we know that there's a lot more work that we're going to see from you, and we've absolutely, I have to say, this is one of the best international experiences I've ever had, and I just thank you so much.
Thank you.
I thank all of you for coming to see this play.